Hello and welcome to this new Trial Live episode. My name is Philippe Ozil. I'm a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and today I'm going to be talking about Tableau. So I'm going to take you on a deep dive on the Tableau visualization component that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Before I jump into the presentation, I need to give you the forward-looking statement. We are a publicly traded company, so please make your buying decisions based on what is commercially available in the product. Right, now this is said, let's talk about the agenda of our session. So it's going to be twofold. First, I'm going to talk about how you can use the Tableau Viz Lightning component, and I'm going to present what it does and a couple of different ways to use it. Then I'm going to jump on something that is slightly more technical. We're going to take a deep dive on the technical implementation of the component. We'll be looking at the source code and a couple of highlights from the implementation. So what is the Tableau Viz component? What does it do? As the name implies, it's something that lets you add a Tableau visualization within Salesforce Lightning Experience and a couple of other places. Underneath, it uses the Tableau JavaScript API to render the visualization, and all it needs is a URL of that viz to render the viz. Now, the component, as I mentioned, went GA pretty recently. Actually, the precise date is September 21st. It is available in two different ways. You can get it from the App Exchange as a managed package. This is a free component. Or you can also get it from the open source repository on GitHub. And we'll be looking at the source code in the second part of this session. So if you have any comments, if you'd like to contribute, feel free to visit this repository. I'll share the link in the resources at the end of the session. So I mentioned there are a couple of different ways to use this component, and there are in fact 4 different ways to use it. You can use the component on app page or home pages in Lightning Experience. You can also use the component on record pages. And the reason why I've separated this from the 2 previous options is actually that this is adding extra functionality. When you use the component on the record page, you get the ability to filter the viz based on the current record context. More on that when we jump to the demo. You can also use the component outside of Lightning Experience. You can use it in the Salesforce communities. And you can also use the component directly within a parent Lightning component. So this last option requires code, unlike the 3 first options. So I'm going to highlight all of these different options, and let's switch to a demo now to see that in action. All right, we're going to jump into our first demo of the day, and I'm going to show you how you can use the Tableau component within Salesforce. We're going to start by working on a home page. I've created here a developer edition, and I have installed the Tableau Viz 91 component as a managed package. So I'm going to edit my home page using the Lightning App Builder. I'm going to minimize the standard components, and here we can look at the custom managed components. We can find our Tableau Viz component. So let's just drop it on top of our page here, and you can see that it works out of the box. So by default, it will use one of the Tableau public viz that are on Tableau public. Let's look at the parameters. So the most important parameter here is the URL, and you can see this is a public viz here on public Tableau. But we can replace that with something a bit more exciting, one of our views that we have customized. So to do that, we need to have access to a Tableau instance or Tableau server. What I did here is I used a trial version, and I've prepared that. And we can see here I'm in Tableau Online, and I've prepared a bunch of dashboards here for the demo. What I need to do now in order to render them is to simply click on the 3 little dots here and to click on share. And from there, I'll have a model dialog that opens with a link. So I'm going to copy that link, which is the link to our view, which has been published. So it's important to note that you must publish your view to access it outside of this editor. And if I go back now to my Lightning App Builder, I can replace this URL with my own URL. I'll remove the parameters here just to simplify the URL, and this points to my opportunity dashboard. If I click outside of the input here, the view will refresh, and we have our own Viz displayed in our page. Now, when you work with home pages or with Lightning pages, there are not a lot of options. You can show tabs if your Viz has different tabs. This one doesn't have any, so I'm not going to show it. But you could also decide to show or hide the toolbar. And in this particular instance, I own this particular Viz, so I have a lot of options here. Regular users will be able to download and share, but depending on your access rights, you have more or less. So I'm just going to hide it because it's not as nice to have it. And I can save it, and then we can go back to our view here, and we can see the home page with our Viz being displayed. So remember that this is a Viz, and so it's interactive by default. So for example, if you click on the different regions, you're able to drill down in data. Here, for example, we're looking at agriculture in France. All right. So that's one way of using it. There's another way which is a bit more exciting and a bit more configurable, and that's adding the Viz component on a record page. So I'm going to work with opportunities here. I'm going to take one of my opportunities, and I'm going to customize the view. What I did to prepare this demo is that I've created an extra tab here called Region Stats, and I've left a little placeholder here that I will replace with a Tableau Viz. So again, same thing, I'm going to go in the app builder, I'm going to edit this page, and I'm going to replace my placeholder with my Tableau components. Let me open this thing here, I'll get rid of the placeholder, and I will replace that with my Tableau Viz component. So I've kept the URL of my Viz in my clipboard, so I can paste it. Again, getting rid of the extra parameters here and refreshing the view. There we go. We have the same dashboard that we had on the home page here, but we're going to take it one step further here, and we're going to filter that dashboard based on some record information. For the sake of the demo, I've created a custom field on my accounts, and I've used the formula to bring it down at this level. So I have a region field set up on the account that is being propagated to the opportunity record via a formula. And we can use this value region to actually control the v region field that is in the Viz. So how do we do that? Well, there are a certain number of things that you can pass from the record context to the Viz. The first one is not the one we're going to use. This is simply passing the ID of the record to the Tableau dashboard. We're not going to do that because I haven't synced my records on the Tableau side. But we're going to use the second way, which is defining a set of key values, filters, from Tableau and from the record page. So on the Tableau side, I have a region field, which is the field that is mapped to this particular dropdown here. And on my side, on the Salesforce side of things, we also have a record field which is also called region. Now, as soon as I'm gonna move the focus away from this particular input here, we're going to see an error message here. And this is essentially to tell us that we need to have values in both fields. There's no way in the app build to make those two fields required at the same time. So we're just showing a little error message here for the admin if we're forgetting to add a second value in the Salesforce filter. So here I'm going to say region. It's also named region. And so there we go. We now have the ability to filter our dashboard based on the region of the record. So you can see here we're in North America and the filter is positioned on North America. Let me save that, and we're going to do a test with another opportunity record. I'm going to take another one. I think this Dickinson maybe. Yeah, no, Dickinson is in North America. Gene Point, yeah, Gene Point is in Asia, for example. So if I go now in region stats and I open my tab here, I'll see my Viz filtered on the Asia region. Of course, this is not locked. I can still play with it, but it's just the default value that is being selected. So that's a bit more powerful. So that's the second way of using the Tableau Viz component. There's also another thing you can do with the component is you can use it within a Salesforce community. Here I have a basic template for the community. I'm in the community builder. In the same way that we have components for the app builder, you have also components for the community builder. And if you scroll down there at the end, we also have our Tableau Viz component that you can drop anywhere in the community template here. And you can configure it in the same way as you would with a home page or a Lightning page. Nothing specific to communities. One thing that will change with the arrival of the Winter 21 release is that you will have to set up a trusted CSP site with your Tableau host. So if you're using something that is not behind the .tableau.com domain, you will need to add a trusted CSP site to allow the connection from the dashboard to the Tableau server. But that's only for Winter 21. All right. Now, that is 3 different ways of using the Tableau Viz Lightning Web component. So there's a 4th way of displaying a Tableau Viz component, and for that I need to switch orgs. So I'm going to move to another org here, which is a Scratch org, and on this particular org I have deployed and implemented a custom Lightning Web component here. You can see it here. It's called Tableau Composition Demo. It has a drop down which contains 2 different items here, which are actually hard-coded values mapping to my dashboards on my Tableau server. So if I select one, I'll be able to show the Viz mapping the option. All right, simple. That's a very basic use case, but the idea here is that I can demonstrate that I can integrate the Viz component within a parent Lightning Web component and control the Viz programmatically. So how does that work? I'm going to move now to VS Code and we're going to look at the source code. In this particular instance, I was on a Scratch org and I've installed the component directly from the GitHub repository. And I've created this composition demo component as well that I've deployed to my org. This is what we're going to look at. If we look at the template, this component has the drop-down you've just seen, which contains a list of Viz options that I've hard-coded in the JavaScript. And it also contains a reference to our Viz component. You'll note that this component is accessed with the local namespace. If we were using a package to install the Tableau Viz component, we would have the tab-tableau-viz tag name instead. Now, what's interesting here is that we're using a dynamic property here to set up the Viz URL, and we're going to take a look at the JavaScript to see how this happens. By default, the Viz is not shown, and only when we have a value for Viz URL will we display our Tableau component. Let's take a look here. So what we have here is again our public property with the Viz URL. We have the hard-coded options for the different dashboards. So this is really a minimalistic demo here. I've really copied paste the 2 URLs of my dashboards. And here we have a change handler for our dropdown. Whenever the dropdown value changes, we assign the Viz value, which is the URL of the Viz, to the Viz URL property. This will trigger a re-rendering of the component and display the Viz. So this is a really simple example with really probably not something you want to do, but it's just to show you that you have programmatic access to the component. Now, one of the most interesting ways of using that is when you start mixing things from the user context and with extra data. The Tableau GitHub repository contains a pointer to another sample repository which demonstrates how you can use, for example, the current user locale to serve a particular dashboard. So you could have different dashboards implemented in different languages that you can serve to your user depending on his own language preferences. Another use case for that, for example, would be to have multiple filters. In the previous example, when we attached the Viz component to the record page, we could only filter on 2 things, the record ID and a set of custom Tableau field name and custom record field name. But if we wanted to have multiple filters, like for example, a second Tableau field and a second record field, we could not do that because we're limited by the Lightning App Builder property editor. So with a programmatic approach, we could build a list of filters by adding extra filter values to the Tableau URL here. That's another use case. All right, now that we have seen the different ways of using the Tableau component, let's go back to the slides. I'm going to talk about technical implementation. All right, now that we have seen the different options on how to use the component, let's go and look at its technical implementation. We're going to be looking at source code, and I'm going to share some highlights from the technical implementation of the component. There are actually two things I'd like to share with you today. The first one is how we're able to render a dynamic pick list in the Lightning App Builder property editor. This is something very convenient in terms of user experience. And the second thing I want to share with you is how we handle loading two asynchronous resources in parallel within the component. The first highlight of the day is the dynamic pick list in the Lightning App Builder property editor. You may have seen that when I did the demo. There is a pick list which lets you select the record field when you place the component on the record page. And this is used to filter the viz based on a particular field value. So what is different from this user experience is that you get a pick list with an auto completion here. Unlike the other fields like height, for example, which is just a static input. So how does this work? The way it works is that when you declare the component, you basically set up some metadata for the Lightning component. And in particular, there is a field that has a data source which is mapping to an Apex endpoint. And here you can see the definition of that particular endpoint. That's Apex : / object field pick list. Now, how does that relate to Apex code? Well, there is a class name with this exact particular name that implements a specific interface. And this interface defines a method called getValues, which will let us return specific values to the Lightning App Builder. And this, we're going to see the implementation of this particular interface from the object field pick list class. All right, let's see how we're building a dynamic pick list in the app builder. So if you recall the slides, it all starts with the component metadata. And here we're talking about the Tableau Viz.js-meta XML file. Now, this is where everything happens. So we have a set of targets which describe the different page types that this component supports. And we're going to look at the Lightning record page target, which has its own specific configuration. Here you'll find a bunch of property tags here, which indicates the different inputs we can have. And if we scroll down the list, at the end, we'll have the particular property that is relevant for this demo. This is the SF Advanced Filter, which is the record field pick list. And what's interesting with this property is that it has a data source attribute which maps to an Apex class. And this means that it's loading its data dynamically by calling an Apex class. And this is the name of our Apex class, Object Field Pick List. Let's take a look at this particular Apex class. So if I open my classes here, we'll find our Apex class. And what I want to call out first is that this class is extending a particular system class called Dynamic Pick List. This is what is required to serve that dynamic pick list. Now, there are a few methods that we inherit from this particular class here, and the most important one being at the bottom of the file here is called getValues, and this returns a dynamic pick list rows object. This object contains the element that are being rendered in the Lightning App Builder dropdown. So how do we build this .rows? So we need to get back on the top of the file and we need to look at the constructor of our class. There are actually two constructors. There's one which is global, which is the one the Lightning App Builder uses, and it's being passed a specific context called a design time page context. This context holds two things which are relevant for us. It holds a bit more information, in fact, but we only use two things from this context. We use a page type, which is essentially here in our case a record page, and also it holds an entity name, which is the name of the object on which this component is being placed on. So if we are looking at opportunities, it would be the opportunity object, for example, here. We also have another constructor here, which is public. This one is meant only for testing, and it's a way to replace and inject values to simulate the design time page context for our tests. Whether you use the test constructor or the public constructor, we call the getRows method here. And what this does is essentially it retrieves the field values for this particular object name. So we're going to call another method called getObjectFields, which in turn will use schema describe as object to retrieve the list of fields. I'm going to go over the logic very quickly, but what's important in the end is that we get a list of fields that we pass to the rows property, which is dynamic picklist rows, and we return that value in our constructor. This is how we pass back the picklist values with the name of the different object fields. All right, now that we have seen that, let's jump to the last technical highlight of the session. I'm going to talk about how we handle loading different resources asynchronously within the component. So this is probably related to one of the sessions I gave earlier about handling asynchronicity in JavaScript. Feel free to watch it from Trial Live. And let's now go back to the context of this component. There are actually two things that happen when the component loads. And the first thing that happens is that the component calls the connected callback method. This method is part of the component lifecycle hooks. And what this means is basically that the component has been inserted in the DOM in the page. So when this happens, we get to run some custom code from the component, and we start by issuing a first asynchronous request to load the Tableau JavaScript API that is stored as a static resource. So this is the first request. This can take some time, and in parallel, we issue a second request. So this happens when we place the component on a record page. We call a @wire to get the current record information. So this is only working when we have the component on the record page. So what this does is it's just basically using the APIs to retrieve the value of the current record. Now these two things happen in parallel. Normally there is no way of telling which one returns first. And this could be problematic for the next step of the component initialization, because the next thing the component needs to do is to call the render_viz function that we've implemented that triggers the JavaScript API for Tableau. But this JavaScript API needs two things. It needs to be loaded, and so we need to have response of the static resource, and it also needs the current record data. And if it's missing one of these two things, it can't properly initialize. So how do we make sure that render_viz is only called after those two requests have returned values? Well, we use a technique called gating, and the way it works is basically having Boolean values, which tells us whether these two requests are completed. And after each request returns, we are calling render_viz. So in fact, connected callback and the @wire function are both calling render_viz, but render_viz will have this gate, which is basically a check on these two conditions, that will return when the two responses are not returned. So let's see that in code now. This is going to be even easier to understand. And we're back in Visual Studio Code. Let's close our class here, and we're going to focus on the Lightning Web Component. So we're going to take some time looking at the JavaScript part of our Lightning Web Component. Remember the diagram, we start by getting the connected callback lifecycle hook. And this is happening here. We've turned this into an asynchronous function. And the first thing we do is that we load a JavaScript resource, which is stored as a static resource. This is the Tableau JavaScript API. Once this is done, we set a isLibLoaded flag to true, and we call render_viz for the first time. Now, what happens also at the same time is that we are also running a wire adapter to get the current record data. So this also happens in parallel. This can end before or after we're loading the static resource. But essentially what we're doing now after getting data back in is extracting the filter values from the current record information, setting it for later, and also calling renderViz again. And if we look now at our renderViz function, you'll see here the different gates. There are actually 3 gates, like what I said in a previous slide. We're also gating when we call on render callback, because we can also render the component without having retrieved all the data. And so this is the first gate, checking that we have the right inputs. This includes having retrieved, having the right settings to render the viz. We then check that the JavaScript library is loaded. And finally, we make sure that we have retrieved the information from the current record if we're looking at a component displayed on the record page. So these are the 3 gates, and what they do is that they halt the renderViz function if we don't have all 3 conditions met. And this is how we can make sure that we guarantee the asynchronous process of these 3 parallel events: connected callback, rendered callback, and the @wire statement retrieving the record value. All right, back to the slides. All right, it's now time for me to conclude. We've seen the 4 different ways to use the component. Again, this is from the app page or the home page in Lightning Experience, from a record page with the ability to add custom filters, from the communities with the community builder, and finally within a parent Lightning Web component. We have seen some technical highlights. We saw how the component is able to render a dynamic picklist in Lightning App Builder, and we also saw how we handle concurrent asynchronous requests that are being issued to load static resources and also wire statement. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of resources and you can try the component yourself. The first thing I want to share with you is the fact that this component is available on the App Exchange, and this is the exact name from the listing. It's called Tableau Viz Lightning Web Component. Make sure not to mistake this with the app. So you want to be looking at the component section of the Lightning on the App Exchange. There's also the Tableau GitHub repository called Tableau Viz LWC. This is where the source code of the component is. This is the exact same thing as the managed package available on the App Exchange, except that if you find issues with the component on the App Exchange, feel free to report issues directly on the GitHub repository. And the Tableau team also is welcoming contributions. So if you have something that you would like to add to the component, well, feel free to contribute it there. If you want to know more about the Tableau Developer Program, feel free to reach out to them. They're always listening for feedback, and I think it's good to subscribe to get all the latest on Tableau technology. And finally, if you're not comfortable with Tableau at all, well, you can learn about Tableau from Trailhead, and here I've linked one of the basics modules called Tableau Basics, which guides you through what Tableau is and what you can do with it. I hope you have enjoyed this session. I would like to thank you for watching, and I'm going to take questions from the chat.